Hello, everyone. It's Aunt Nikki of Your Story Hour. I hope you are all doing well today and are looking forward to our second chapter in Too Much Salt and Pepper by Sam Campbell. And it says, Two porcupines with prickly spines who make you laugh and think. Chapter 2, Crunch, Crunch, and Double Crunch. For weeks we had been looking forward with joy to the rest that would be ours when we arrived at our sanctuary. We knew well the quiet and peace which awaited us. In noisy cities where sound sleep was almost impossible, we would comfort ourselves with the thought of our North Woods home. There we would be free from the excitement and pressure of city life. There we would doze away to the lullaby of the wind in the pines. There we would know a dreamless sleep in a seamless silence. And that first night of our return, we set about to collect this promised sleep. We were right tired by the time the most necessary things had been done that first evening. We went to bed and were just entering the pearly gates of our dreamless paradise when there came a sound so penetrating it seemed to bore right into our thoughts. Crunch, crunch, crunch! Salt was chewing at the front door, methodically, persistently, in a way that seemed to promise that though it might take a long time, he would heroically persist until he had chewed the house down. I beat the floor vigorously with my boot. There was profound silence for a moment, and then crunch, crunch, crunch. Pepper was chewing at the back door still at about the same pace and persistence Salt had initiated, as if she would eat her way along until she met him about the middle of the cabin. Again my boot came into service, and after the floor had received another good beating, there was quiet. For a moment we thought we had triumphed, and we had started seeking that elusive sleep again, when came double crunch, double crunch, double crunch. Salt and Pepper were chewing a duet on their respective door sills. Now the annoyance of a porky's chewing is not measured entirely by the sound. There is a threat to his nibbling that denies one any possible comfort while it is going on. Those sharp amber-colored teeth of his can cut through anything that is not made of metal. It always seems that he is working on the last quarter-inch of the foundation of the cabin itself, and any bite may be the final one that produces a complete collapse. If the crunch, crunch, crunch were not associated with a porcupine, if it were being sung by a phonograph, likely we could ignore it or bury our heads beneath a pillow and forget it. But because of the calamity this gnawing promises, we find ourselves propped up on our elbows, listening to it, hoping each of its gripping notes will be the last, and knowing full well that it won't be. I gave the floor several more good beatings with my boot, and thereby gained some moments of silence. But then again would come that crunch, crunch, and double crunch. There was nothing to do but get up. Certainly, that is what Salt and Pepper were working for. They didn't care a thing about those door sills. The sills had been there all winter, and they had not given them a nibble. But they knew that inside those doors were their newly returned human friends. They knew they had been without our companionship long enough. And probably they knew that their gnawing surely sooner or later would get them the attention they wanted. Grudgingly, I went out to play with them for a while. They romped with me, climbed over me, and chewed at the back of my head. It was a lovely night, moon and stars shining, and I might have forgiven them at any other time. But now we wanted that promised sleep, the rest to which we had been looking forward. Then an idea came to me. There had been arranged for these porcupines just one place where they could go under the house. It was not a large opening, and I could easily block it up. Giving them one final tussle, I gathered them up, and before they could form any possible objections, I had tucked them under the house and placed a log at the opening. Now, there they could stay until morning and let door sills alone. Also, let us have some sleep. Again we had tiptoed almost to dreamland, the peace and silence of the forest with ours at last, when crunch, 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 yes, and double crunch too. Right under our beds they had started chewing on the floor joist. It was 100-fold more intimate and threatening than the nibbling of the door sills that had been, and they interceded with the crunching with occasional conversation and calls. There were violent beatings on the floor with boots and other articles, but these gained only momentary relief. Before the new spasm had subsided, I was outside again, kneeling at the opening which led under the house, having hurriedly removed the log I had placed there, literally begging Salt and Pepper to come out and play with me, but to let the house alone. The moon had traveled far in its course across the heavens, and daylight was rather close at hand before the two pesky porcupines developed a hunger for some wild cherry twigs and climbed into a tree near the cabin. We wearily went to gather the remaining fragments of our coveted sleep. The day came all too quickly, and with it much to be done. Salt and Pepper didn't care, though. They slept through most of the sunlit hours slept anyway, that they might be bright and fresh for their work on the door sills and floor joists in nights to come. When the excitement of the several days had passed at the sanctuary, we found time to look around a bit. The forest world was sparkling with spring. There's a picture. Buds were swelling, grasses were greening, spring peepers calling, and bird travelers arriving and looking around energetically for accommodations. Many were making our little island their home. Perhaps they felt the safety of the place. Excuse me. Perhaps they were attracted by the feeding stations, bird bath, and bird hotels we kept ready for their use. Maybe the rich growth of berry trees and bushes were to their liking. Whatever brought them brought us happiness too. Eagerly we watched them as they moved in. Some were old friends, some new friends. All were welcome. We saw the purple finch select a crotch of a white birch tree as a home site, and we knew then that our mornings and evenings would be saturated with one of the sweetest songs of the wild wood. We saw the song sparrow eyeing with satisfaction a low balsam tree near the water's edge, and we knew that soon his bouncing happy song would adorn the solitude. The trim little white-throated sparrow found a hollow stump to his liking. Everything already lovely in the wild wood would be made lovelier by his plaintive sweet, "Poor John Peabody, Peabody, Peabody." Phoebe returned again to the favorite spot under the eaves of our boathouse where she had nested for 3 years. An oriole chose the delicate drooping limbs of a yellow birch as the building site of her remarkable woven house. A warbling vireo moved into a wild cherry tree. An oven bird selected the grasses on the little hillside in which to build that funny little nest that looks like a Dutch oven. Tree swallows moved into hollows in dead trees in a nearby swamp. Red-winged blackbirds nested in tangled swamp shrubbery near them. Martins entered the home prepared for them on the tip of another small island, while the inevitable robins were everywhere. Certainly, we were not going to want for bird music in the weeks ahead. We were not going to want for other woodland interest either. The whole sanctuary was rich with promise. Beavers had established themselves in a little cove we call Beaver Bay. We found evidence of their presence in freshly cut trees along the shores and up the creek, and in floating sticks of aspen from which the bark had been removed by their sharp teeth. Bears were in the region of Vanishing Lake, along the trail to the little lake where were several trees having their unmistakable marks. Nature students are not in agreement as to the motive bears have in making such marks. The powerful creatures fly at a tree as if they were going to pull it to pieces. They will strike it with their ponderous paws, cut deep gashes in the bark with their claws. Not infrequently they bite into the tree savagely, growling in apparent fury, tearing out great pieces of wood. Some say this is a way of showing off before a mate. Others believe it is posting a challenge to other bears who might invade forbidden territory. Still others believe the purpose, at least in part, is to obtain the medicinal sap of the tree, as bears are seen to come back to trees so treated and lick at the wounds they have made. Perhaps all these purposes are involved, but at least, as far as we are concerned, it was a message that these interesting animals were in our forest. Near the bare trees, there were curious marks on small balsams. These also told us a story. Long scratches ran lengthwise of the little trees, beginning at a point about 3 feet high and running almost to the ground. The autograph of a wildcat, left as the beautiful but cunning creature had yawned and stretched and reached for something on which to try his claws, even as our domestic cats do. At the base of a white spruce, which towered over 100 feet high, were several holes cut deeply into the tree. Excuse me. The holes were fully 2 inches across at the opening and reached a depth of about 3 inches into the tree. On the ground beneath them was a pile of chips, some of the slivers large enough to do credit to the gnawing of our porcupines. But this was the work of the great pea-lated woodpecker, which is exceeded in size only by the ivory-billed woodpecker of the south. He looks to be fully as large as a crow, his head crusted with red, and there is no more happy or industrious workman in all the forest. Chanting incessantly, he bores quickly into the trees, making the chips fly and letting them fall where they may, while he feasts upon insects and grubs he is finding. What grand things we had to watch that season! What pleasure it would be to spy on these creatures, watch their ways, and maybe learn some things we had not known before. Along the north shore of our lake, one of those first days, we found the footprint of an enormous buck. Hurriedly we landed and examined the tracks. We could see where the creature had come down to the water to drink, had wandered along the sandy shore about 50 feet, and then returned into the woods. Likely this visit had happened but a short time before. The footprint of a deer is not at all rare in these sands, and usually such marking would have drawn no more than passing notice from us. But these tracks were of deep interest. They were tremendous in size. "The Antlered King?" queried Ginny, as we noted the great spread and depth of the hoof marks. Perhaps. We could not know from tracks alone, but certainly such a track could indicate the presence of that greatest of all bucks, whom we had named the Antlered King. 2 years before, we had seen him on several occasions. No adventure at the sanctuary was more prized than those moments when we looked upon this magnificent creature, who was so much larger than others of his kind that it seemed he might have been another species. He was a leftover from the earlier years when many living things of the forest were of greater strength and stature. Then a year passed in which we did not see him at all. We feared something had happened to him, but now these tracks, had he returned? One evening Jenny and I sat before the fireplace, making notes of the many things developing in the woodland world about us. There is so much in this great show nature is staging for us that it seems a shame others are not here to enjoy it, I ventured with conviction. Jenny's eyes lit with interest. Yes, I continued, there should be someone with us, perhaps a youth. Someone to ask funny questions and make us think hard to give the answers. Someone to tip things over occasionally, to get in funny kinds of trouble. You are missing Bobby, aren't you? Jenny interrupted. I nodded. Why, there hasn't been a thing dropped or broken or spilled since we arrived. No one has tripped over the coffee pot. No one has fallen into the lake. No one has put salt in the sugar bowl. I tell you, it is monotonous. But Jenny was not listening to me. She had risen, walked over to the desk, and begun writing a letter. I watched her, awaiting an explanation which was not to come. With an air of affected aloofness, she sealed the envelope and stamped it. Am I to know anything about that letter? I finally asked. Maybe. With studied indifference, she placed the envelope in her handbag, obviously to keep me from seeing the address. When? Oh, sometime. Is something going to happen because of this letter? I hope so. Will I like what happens? I hope so, she said. Chapter 3 will be tomorrow, and the title is Such Language. Wonder whose language? Well, thanks for listening to Too Much Salt and Pepper with us, and we'll catch you again another time. Take care and stay safe.